Hello, hello, MrShine here from HearthstonePlayers.com. Today I'm going rogue and bringing you another episode of my Arena Quiz series. For those who haven't seen one of these videos yet, I'm on a mission to complete an arena run for every hero in Hearthstone. Each hero gets 2 videos. One is a drafting quiz where you can pick the deck along with me, and you can grade your score at the end, and the other is a run wrap-up where I discuss some of the more contentious picks in depth and show some highlights of the run. So in this run we pick up the lovely yet deadly Valeera as our arena hero. Before we head into the draft, we should talk a little bit about what makes this hero tick, and how we should think about our arena run. First off, Valeera is the Queen of Tempo. There are a lot of cards at the Rogue's disposal that aren't the best in terms of generating card advantage, but we can do a lot with the available mana crystals to put pressure on the opponent. Things like Sap, Shadow Step, and Conceal are very situational cards that can come up huge when played at the right time, but in general I tend to avoid these sorts of cards since consistency is what I'm looking for in the arena. Another thing to know about Rogue is the hero ability. The ability to ping with a dagger charge is huge, but comes at the cost of health. When used too often, you can put yourself dangerously low in HP, but don't be afraid to dip a bit if it means a more secure board position. The dagger also has some advantage of having 2 charges, and it's usually worth holding on to the extra charge early game as opposed to going face if you don't expect you'll be recharging it the following turn. The best is when you can draft a few deadly poisons into your deck, which acts as a poor man's fiery war axe in the early game or a crushing damage machine on an assassin's blade. Finally, it's time to look at the unique combo mechanic found only on Rogue class cards. Combo is an added effect on a card that activates unless it was the first card you played that turn. You almost always want to utilize the combo effect, since they turn mediocre cards into amazing cards, and planning around your hand in order to make use of potential combos is critical if you want to take command of the early game. It is for this reason that most players prefer to go second as Rogue, since the coin acts like a card to activate things like SI7 Agent and Defias Ringleader. So with some of that background, we're going to try our best to focus on drafting solid cards like always in the arena, with an eye on some of the strong combo cards Valeera has at her disposal. Now let's move to the quiz. Very quickly, start with 100 points. I'll pause between picks to give you a chance to make your own choice before I reveal my picks, and if you picked something I didn't, you'll likely get docked a small amount of points. At the end, you can compare your score to a grading chart I'll set up, and we'll see who is the stealthiest, roguiest arena player of the lot. Oh, in case you haven't seen it yet, Trump, that's right, the Trump, has just recently started a series that's very similar to this one. As a huge Trump fan myself, I think that's pretty sweet. It's possible it's all a simple coincidence, but I'd like to think the conversation went a little something like this.
Trump, have you seen the video series this guy MrShine has been working on? He grades each pick in the arena with pauses for the viewer, and at the end there's a scoring chart where people can compare their scores.
Oh my gosh, that's insane! Tell me more about this guy they call MrShine.
I hear he's super awesome and very handsome.
Whoa, this guy sounds like the real deal. I think we should try something similar on our YouTube channel. Make it so, Jens.
It shall be as you command, my liege.
So there you go, a completely real and unimagined conversation that proves my series is Trump approved. And on that awkward note, let's move to the quiz. The first pick is pretty mediocre, but there's one clear answer, and that's the Questing Adventurer. For Rogue, Questing isn't actually too horrible since there's lots of cheap Rogue cards that might be able to combo with the Questing. In general though, you don't want to treat the Questing Adventurer like a 3-drop because its stats are bad, but if you can hold on to it until a point where you have other ways to buff it on the same turn, it can sometimes get out of control. Ancient Watcher is a good constructed card when you have activators, but it's too easy to be a dead card in the arena without silences or taunt givers. And Angry Chicken, oh Angry Chicken, why are you so bad? The dream of activating the chicken is so remote and so situational. As much as I'd love to find a way to make this furious poultry passable, it's almost always going to get passed up. I took Betrayal since it's often a 1-for-1 removal spell that sometimes has upside if the opponent doesn't play around it. It's not fantastic, but you can usually find a bit of use from it. Acolyte of Pain is a very close second, and there are times it can net you some good card advantage, but as a rogue I'm more interested in establishing early tempo, and Acolyte doesn't put any pressure on your opponent in the early game. Nightblade is a poorly statted 5-drop whose battlecry doesn't impact the board. The 3 damage will rarely come in handy since you can't direct it, and it's outclassed by most other 5-drops. We can do better. Direwolf Alpha has poor stats but can help when played to supplement trades with minions already in the field. The main thing is you don't want to be forced to play it on turn 2. Dancing Swords has good stats, but the death rattle is crippling. The opponent drawing cards is pretty much always a bad thing. Finally, Wind Fury Harpy is expensive and doesn't have a big enough body for a 6 mana. It can pack a wallop when left unchecked, but your opponent will usually remove it fairly easily before it gets a chance to attack. Ogre is an awesome 6-drop since its stats outclass most other 6-drops, so we're quite happy taking it here. Fen Creeper comes next as a somewhat stat-inefficient taunt, but you could do worse in the 5 slot. See Nightblade, pick 2. Finally, the constructed King Undertaker is the weakest pick here. Yes, it's an incredible card if you have a bunch of death rattle in the deck, but we don't, and there's no guarantee we will. Because of this, we have to treat it like a vanilla 1-2 for 1, which won't trade well against pretty much anything. Deadly Poison is awesome. It's 1 mana, so it's easy to combo if we end up getting combo cards, but even if we're not, we're always going to have our hero ability, so the ability to make a 3-2 weapon on the fly is very strong. Fen Creeper has already been talked about before and it's outclassed here, and Dragonhawk's Wind Fury isn't enough to save it from the fact it only has 1 HP, so it'll get killed by anything stronger than a gust of wind. Stormwind Champion can turn an otherwise even game on its head when played at the right time in the late game, and at worst, it's still a big body that your opponent wants to remove in order to prevent future good trades. Conceal is a situational card that's found a home in the constructed Miracle Rogue decklist, but here it's more of a late game finisher to help punch through extra damage, but will often be a dead card in your hand. Cobalt Geomancer's spell power finds a lot of use in a rogue deck, but we don't have enough spells yet to get good use from it, and it's a 2-2 body which is pretty substandard otherwise. This one was tough. On the one hand, I love Ventureco's stats and its aggressiveness. On the other, it's not really a creature you want to survive too long because otherwise it's going to start sapping your tempo with the increased cost of minions. Assassinator is a bit more consistent, and hard removal is often very handy in the arena if you want to take out a big taunt or a threat. Both of these cards are better than Shadow Step though, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a very situational card. I don't really have that much of anything that I'd want to Shadow Step here, and it probably won't be worth the value of a full card in a standard arena deck. We have yet to get a solid 2-drop at this point, and we already have a decent amount of late game with our first 7 picks. Frost Elemental's strong Tempo Battlecry is probably stronger in Rogue than most other heroes, but between an Ogre, Stormwind Champ, and Assassinate, I'm not in urgent need of the reach here. Both beat the Warden though, who enjoys tickling minions that run into it, but doesn't actually threaten anything. Wailing Soul isn't fantastic for 4 mana, but it will do in a pinch, and sometimes it will help get your minions out of a freeze. Blade Flurry comes in second since we have 1 Deadly Poison, but unless we got another one or Assassin's Blade, it's not going to have enough activators in the deck to be worth picking. Light Warden has no place in our deck because we have no way of healing to buff it, and you should know by now that vanilla 1-2s are bad. SI7 Agent is a premium rogue card, and its battlecry is huge in the early game, and the 3-3 body isn't something to shake a stick at either. This card is one of the reasons a rogue with the coin is feared, since you can coin it out on turn 2 to direct 2 damage against your opponent's 3-2 and take control of the board. It's kind of like a Mad Bomber without the insanity nor the luck. Arcane Golem is an all-in play if you use it early since you trade damage for future tempo for your opponent, and a good charger if played late. Alarmabot is trash since you have no control over what it brings into play, and arena decks often won't have enough big minions to make it worthwhile either. If you pick Alarmabot here, you have made me sad. All picks are solid enough, but once again Deadly Poison takes the cake, and now I'm starting to wish I picked that Blade Flurry earlier. Ventureco was discussed earlier, but once again is outclassed with a superior alternative. And Fan of Knives' 1 damage is often not enough, but at least it replaces itself. If you can combine it with spell power, it becomes quite strong. Still, we don't have enough synergy in the deck so far to consider it here. Sun Fury Protector is somewhat underwhelming as a 2-3 body, but it does have upside since it can make taunt walls, and it's still a respectable 2-drop. Arcane Golem is more tempting here than it was when matched against the SI7 Agent, but it still has too much variance for my playstyle and isn't a true 3-drop. Headcrack is straight up garbage. It's super expensive for its 2 damage, and even the fact you don't lose it when comboed doesn't make it any more appealing. Shieldmaster is one of the few taunt minions that has good stats for its cost. It can help curb any early game aggression your opponent may have had, and can protect your own minions if you were already in command. Cold Blood, when comboed, can give a lot of damage quite cheaply, but unless it's being used as a finisher, it's almost always going to generate negative card advantage if you use it to trade into a bigger minion. Dalaran Mage has very poor stats for its cost, and the spell power isn't enough to redeem it. This one was tough, but while I ended up going Protector, I do see merits in taking the Assassin. It's very expensive, but can pack a wallop if not impeded with taunts. Because I felt both were close, I didn't deduct points if you happened to pick it, but oh boy are you getting deducted if you picked Headcrack. It's still bad. So bad. Dark Iron Dwarf is a solid 4/4 for 4, and the Battle Cry is fantastic in allowing a cheaper minion to trade up. Stormwind Champion is also excellent, but we already have one already, and I want to shore up the mid-game at this point. Grunt has bad stats, and the taunt will often just be a speed bump for bigger creatures. Another tough call. I think both Deckhand and Infiltrator are solid options. The Infiltrator is best when you play it on turn 1 since it can sometimes trade into a 3/2, but it's less useful later in the game. South Sea Deckhand is not nearly as good on turn 1, but since rogues always have access to a weapon with their hero ability, the Deckhand can many times be a cheap Bluegill Warrior 2/1 charger. In short, it's cheap and flexible, and I felt it might be more useful at other points in the game. Sap isn't a bad tempo play either, but it's really only a delay tactic that's strongest in decks designed for lots of quick damage. The arena is much more about card advantage and board trades, and when viewed in that light, it's almost always going to generate negative card advantage. Since I already have 2 deadly poisons, Assassin's Blade was a no-brainer here. It's already a strong weapon, and with the deadly poison it becomes an unstoppable death machine. At first glance, the Ambusher has incredible stats, beating even Yeti with its 5/5 body. The Battle Cry is not even always bad. If it's alone on the board, it does nothing, and sometimes it's not the end of the world if you bounce a minion with a valuable Battle Cry. Yet it can also backfire and set you back, and while it probably would have been my second choice here, it's something I'll need to test more in the future and see how strong the card actually is. Fan of Knives comes last just because of its mediocre ability and the fact the other cards are simply better. Earthen Ring Farseer is a solid 3-drop since its Battle Cry can be relevant, and at worst it's still a 3/3. Corehound is a very angry dog with its huge 9 damage, but it's too easy to kill with the 5 HP and ultimately doesn't do enough for me with the mana that it costs. Vanish is an odd card. The upside is your opponent will never expect it, but the downside is unless you had a way to immediately reclaim the board after spending the 6 mana for Vanish, it usually ends up just delaying the inevitable death for a turn instead of actually doing anything useful. Bloodsail Raider has a lot of synergy in a rogue deck. It can easily be played as a 2/3 for 2, but it can also be a 3/3 if you have your weapon out, or even more with weapon buffs. Since I already have an Assassin's Blade and 2 deadly poisons, there's a lot of upside for the Raider, ultimately making it worth picking here. Wolf Rider isn't bad, but it's pretty average as 3 damage for 3 mana. Sinister Strike is quite awful. It doesn't do much as a finisher, and it has no other use aside from that. It's an easy pass here. I'm once again picking the Protector due to uninspiring alternative options. Mana Addict is too vulnerable as a 3/1, and I can't rely on a ton of spells to utilize its ability if it ever survives to my turn. And Headcrack, why are you still here? Haven't I berated your badness enough already? Do you enjoy the abuse? Jeepers. My inner pirate must have been calling me on this run, because again I make a somewhat controversial pick with the Dread Corsair. Because of the weapons and buffs this deck has, my thinking is I'll almost never be forced into playing this for 4 mana, and playing the Corsair for 1 or 0 mana is a very strong tempo play if and when I can get it set up. Having said that, Assassinate is also quite reasonable here since it's reliable and consistent despite its high expense. Both are much better than the Goldshire Footman, another bad one too, whose stats make the card nearly useless. I am able to resist my inner pirate this time as I decide to take Zombie Chow. Its stats are bananas for a 1-drop, and its death rattle is insignificant in the early game. Deckhand is still good in Rogue, and I wouldn't have hated to take another, but it's not Zombie Chow. Grunt is bad, and Zombie Chow shows you how bad it is since you can trade with the Grunt and survive while costing 1 mana less. Spellbreaker is a reasonable body for 4, but it's the silence that can help give it more value. It's situational, but there are enough minor things to silence in the arena that it usually finds value and can still be played on 4 as a vanilla 4/3 in a pinch. War Golem is a huge fat thing, but we don't have that many ways to utilize huge fat things as opposed to, say, Priest, so it's less valuable to us. And Cold Blood has been discussed before, and I don't think our deck is aggressive enough to make it work. With the amount of early drops in my deck has at this point, I felt like Cult Master would have some good opportunities to grab me a few cards. Since I already have a lot of the aforementioned 2-drops, I didn't think another was needed, although both Berserker and the Creeper are good 2-drops I'd otherwise be happy taking. Eviscerate is one of the best removal spells in the game, since it's quite easy to combo, and the 4 damage for 2 is awesome. It beats even the Ogre, which is one of the best 6-drops we have available. Assassinate is also good, but the other 2 are so premium it can't compete here. Oh man, more Deadly Poison, my Dread Corsair is looking even better, but I'm going to start thinking about the amount of face damage this deck might be taking. Ventrico is a close second and provides a big body, but I still felt like the Deadly Poison is just too useful. Haunted Creeper is still good, but again we're flooded with early drop minions already. Yeti's 4/5 body is quite simply the poster child for premium 4-drops. It's going to beat most anything, and a good mid-range body is helpful for this deck at this point. Cult Master is good, but we already have one, and Priestess of Elune has crummy stats that don't justify its costs. Is the Priestess's Battlecry worth the extra 2 mana and slightly worse stat allocation? I don't think so, and neither should you. I can see this pick going a few ways. Ooze is a great 2-drop that can shut down weapon classes, but Spellbreaker's Silence is also quite useful. Given the current curve, I can see people going both ways, but I did end up opting for the Ooze here. Abusive Sergeant is the poor man's Dark Iron Dwarf, who has a useful battlecry but provides a far less appealing body on the board. Hom nom nom, more tasty zombie chow early game efficiency. Shiv isn't horrible since it draws a card to replace it, but I didn't think the 1 damage was going to be valuable enough here. Cold Blood is back again, and given my low curve, I'm starting to wonder if I should have considered some early. At least if I knew I could have drafted a million Cold Bloods, I might have geared my deck to be more aggressive. But such is the perils of trying to draft a consistent deck. Sometimes you miss out on some crazy combo potential the draft offers you. This one was tricky, although I ended up taking the Giant. Given all the Deadly Poisons I had and the Assassin's Blade, odds were quite high I was going to be taking a lot of damage this run. Another big minion would serve my deck well, even more so if I could play it very cheaply as a strong tempo play. Blood Knight and South Sea Captain are both quite good 3-drops however. The Blood Knight can sometimes become a huge 6/6 in the early game to eat a Divine Shield, and South Sea Captain had a handful of Pirates in my deck that it could potentially buff. Neither are consistent though, and this deck already had enough cheap early minions. One more didn't seem like it could benefit my deck more than a cheap 8/8 would. Well, there you have it, my rogue draft has come to an end. Taking a second to look at the deck in its entirety, I think I should have some very solid starts for most of my games, which hopefully will seal the deal before it gets too late. My late game looks pretty light though, and with all my early drops I'll be very susceptible to AoE like Consecration and Flamestrike. If I lose the board, it's unlikely I'll be able to claw my way back out. I think the odds of me winning will improve greatly if I start games with a 1-drop, since that should help set up tempo afterwards. The dream will be for me to start with a coin and a 1-drop, a Deadly Poison, and an SI7 agent in my hand to dominate the early game. With all of that said and done, I take you now to the MrShine scoreboard. Voila! As I've mentioned in the past, being a few picks off for me doesn't necessarily mean that you're a worse drafter. It could simply mean you and I have different playstyles or arena philosophies. I wouldn't sweat the small stuff, but if you took the bait on some of the cards I penalized more heavily, I feel pretty confident in saying that those were errors that likely made your deck weaker, or would in the long run if you continued picking cards like those. Now all that's left is seeing where this run ends up. What do you think about this draft? Do you think I have enough in the early game to go deep in the arena? Or will my lack of late game be my undoing? How about my draft decisions? Do you think there were picks I made that were incorrect? Let me know in the comment section at HearthstonePlayers.com. Finally, how about that Trump voice of mine? A great impersonation? Or the greatest impersonation? Tune in next week to see the results of this run and get an answer to all these questions. If you enjoyed this video and want more of the same, be sure to like and subscribe to HearthstonePlayers.com's YouTube channel for a variety of Hearthstone goodness. Or take a look at my personal YouTube channel, which has a mix of other gaming content. As always, I've been MrShine, and I'll see you next time!